Emergency alert. Missing child. I usually ignore Amber Alerts, but there was something different about this one. It wasn't normal. When my phone buzzed and I went to read it, I immediately knew something about this one was horribly wrong. Child abduction. Be on the lookout for a missing 6-year-old blonde male in the back of a 2012 silver Chevy Impala. For a second it stunned me. That sounded just like my car. And the description of the child sounded just like my son Richie. I looked up in the rearview mirror to smile at him. He was singing the song to a Disney album and playing with his toy dinosaurs. This had to be some kind of mistake, I thought. So I tossed the phone on the passenger side of the car and pulled out toward the interstate. I thought everything was fine. I knew it had to be a mistake. Except I was wrong, and this was just the beginning of my worst nightmare. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again, and an update to the Amber Alert was sent out. As I read it, chills immediately shot down my spine. It was my license plate number. My body instantly went numb, and I didn't know what to do. I looked in the back of the car again and tried to retrace my steps. I had just picked Richie up early from kindergarten so we could grab some ice cream. I signed him out and we talked about Transformers on the way out of the building. He was wearing a mask, of course, when he came out, and that got me to second-guess myself. Had the teacher given me the wrong kid? No, I know what my son looks like, I thought as I looked at the rear view again. He didn't seem to have a care in the world. So why was this alert popping up? I think I drove another good 2 minutes before I made it to the next rest stop and decided to call someone. Maybe I'd forgotten to sign him out. Maybe the school had decided to make the call when they thought he was missing. Surely this was all a big misunderstanding. I made a call to the school to speak with the principal. Mrs. Shepard here, the voice said distractedly. Hi, this is Charles Bowman. I just wanted to double-check with you about the sign-out sheet for Richie, I said nervously as I looked around the rest stop. I didn't know who to ask for help, but I was feeling panicked. I figured if a cop came by, I could square the whole thing up. Let them talk to the school. This could be resolved, I kept telling myself as my hands began to shake more and more. I knew something about this was deeply wrong, no matter how innocent I knew I was. There was a short pause as the teacher looked up the information, and then the principal came back on the line. I'm sorry, who did you say you were? Mrs. Shepard asked. Charles Bowman. My son is in Mrs. Kemp's class. I came and got him about 30 minutes ago. I was sweaty. Something in her voice sounded off, and then she said something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. I'm sorry, sir. I think you must be confused. Richie Bowman is still here at the school. It took me a moment to register what she was saying. It all felt like a bad dream. Check again. Because I'm staring at him in my back seat, I insisted. The principal placed me on hold and I looked at Richie again. He had stopped bouncing and playing and seemed to be paying extra attention to the conversation. Hey buddy, you okay? I said with a smile. Something was very wrong. The whole world felt like it was suddenly turned upside down. Sir, are you still there? Mrs. Shepard was back. I'm here. The words felt dry in my throat. I didn't feel like I meant anything I said. It was just this overwhelming sense of dread filling my body. I just came from Mrs. Kemp's. Richie is in class, so I would really appreciate it if you stopped this prank and told me exactly why you were calling. I hung up. I was staring at Richie in the back seat as she told me, but it didn't feel like I was looking at my son anymore. What are you? I asked, struggling to find the words to make sense of this nightmare. I didn't even understand how I had gotten an alert on my phone. After all, if the school thought that my Richie was in class, then who would send this? The phone buzzed again. Except this time it wasn't an alert. It was instructions. Take him to 312 Sparrow Lane. If you tell anyone, we will kill you both. I knew that place. It was a housing development in the shady part of town next to the high school. Some even reported that there were mass shootings there often. But I didn't know what else to do except to listen to this mysterious messenger. I got off the highway and made my way there, all the while keeping an eye on the child in the back seat. Instead of playing like he had before, this time he was deathly silent, as if he knew precisely where we were going. I should have known this wasn't my son. Maybe things would have gone differently if I had realized. As we got closer to the stop, his attitude changed dramatically. Suddenly he started screaming, a blood-curdling cry that told me there was danger here. I slowed down right outside the address, looking toward the desolated building and wondering who could have brought me here. My phone buzzed again with more instructions and demands. Place the child outside the vehicle. At that point, the child that looked identical to my son was thrashing, trying to break loose, screaming and gnashing angrily, trying to cut at himself with his teeth. You can't do this, Dad! You can't! It sounded just like Richie. It made my skin crawl. Tears rolled down my eyes, but I knew I had to be strong. I had to find the real Richie. Calm down, I insisted as I unbuckled and got around to his side. I needed this to be over, to get away from this insanity and get back to my Richie. The child was now hardly even sounding human with his guttural shrieks and cries, his fingernails digging into my skin as he begged for it to stop. I managed to reach in and loosen his strap, letting him out of the car, and then hopped inside and locked the doors. I was too frightened to see what he might do to me if I stayed outside. He fumbled to the ground, seemingly unable to walk. Then a moment later he let out a painful cry and a massive shadow moved from the building. I held my breath and couldn't believe my eyes. It looked like a troll. That's the best way that I can describe this monster. Its body was covered in soot and ash and moss. Gray and black vines twisted about its arms the way veins would as it towered over the child. The most noticeable feature was a large blood-red scar that ran down the back of his neck. I hadn't noticed it before until now. With its mighty hand, which looked to be at least twice the size of my Impala, it scooped up the child. All the while, the smaller creature screeched and twirled, trying to escape. But it was too late. The monster dragged it back into the shadows, and even after it had disappeared, I could still hear its shrieks. I sat there in stunned shock for the longest time, too numb to move. Then my phone buzzed again. "You are free to go. You can find your son in the alley behind the building." I sprinted to the alley and saw Richie sitting in a corner all alone. I picked him up and we shared a hug that felt like it lasted hours. "Daddy, what happened?" he said with tears rolling down his cheeks. "It's okay, buddy. I'm here now. Nothing is going to hurt you," I told him. I put him in my car and we sped out of there. This nightmare was finally over. As we were driving, all I could think of was that poor creature and how my fear had allowed it to be taken by a worse evil. I don't know what I experienced today, but I know now the world is full of magic, both good and bad. I'm just happy that I have my real son back. A few minutes later, when we got to a red light though, I glanced back at my rearview mirror to check on Richie, and I noticed something different. He bent his head down to scratch his head, and on the back of his neck I saw something. I didn't notice it earlier. It was a dark red scar running all the way down the back of his neck.